Maria Santos stepped off the Greyhound bus at the Phoenix terminal, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her faded military uniform clinging to her thin frame. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as she walked toward the job fair venue, her combat boots clicking against the hot pavement. She had traveled 3 states to get here, using the last of her savings for the bus ticket and a motel room for the night. The uniform she wore had seen better days. The desert camouflage pattern was faded from countless washings, and there were small tears near the shoulder where a piece of shrapnel had grazed her during her second deployment to Afghanistan. The fabric was soft and worn, like an old favorite shirt that had been loved too much to throw away. Maria couldn't afford a new interview outfit, and this uniform was all she had that looked remotely professional. As she entered the convention center where the job fair was being held, Maria noticed the stark contrast between herself and the other job seekers. Young college graduates in crisp suits walked confidently between booths, their resumes printed on expensive paper tucked neatly in leather portfolios. Business professionals in designer clothing networked effortlessly, their smartphones buzzing with important calls and messages. Maria found herself in line at the registration table behind a group of recent MBA graduates. She could hear their conversation about internships at Fortune 500 companies and starting salaries that were more than she had made in her entire 4 years of military service. When she reached the front of the line, the registration volunteer, a college-aged girl with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Name?" the volunteer asked, not bothering to make eye contact. "Maria Santos," she replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The volunteer handed her a name tag and information packet without another word, already looking past her to the next person in line. Maria pinned the name tag to her uniform and walked into the main hall, where dozens of company booths were set up in neat rows. She approached the first booth, a large technology company that was advertising entry-level positions in project management. The recruiter, a man in his 30s wearing an expensive suit and gold watch, barely glanced at her before saying, "We're really looking for candidates with relevant education and experience. I have 4 years of logistics and personnel management experience," Maria began. But the recruiter had already turned his attention to a young man in a navy suit who had approached the booth. At the next booth, a financial services company, the response was similar. The female recruiter looked at Maria's faded uniform with a mixture of pity and dismissal. "Honey, maybe you should try the government contractor section. They sometimes have openings for, people with your background." The subtle condescension in her voice stung more than outright rudeness would have. Maria thanked her politely and moved on, but she could feel the weight of stares following her as she walked through the convention center. She overheard whispered conversations as she passed groups of other job seekers. "Is she homeless?" one woman whispered to her friend. "Maybe she's confused about what kind of event this is," another person said, not bothering to lower his voice. A group of young professionals standing near the coffee station openly snickered as she walked by. One of them, emboldened by his friend's laughter, called out loud enough for others to hear, "Hey, did someone tell her this wasn't a costume party?" Maria's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept walking with her head held high. She had faced worse than a few ignorant comments from people who had never served their country. During her deployments, she had managed supply chains under enemy fire, coordinated evacuations of wounded soldiers, and led teams of men and women in life-or-death situations. She wouldn't let a few snide remarks break her spirit. But as the morning wore on, the rejection became harder to bear. Booth after booth, recruiter after recruiter, the response was the same. Some were polite, but dismissive. Others were openly rude. A few seemed genuinely sympathetic, but explained that they were looking for candidates with different qualifications. At a marketing firm's booth, the recruiter actually laughed when Maria mentioned her interest in their communications specialist position. "Communications? Like, you mean radio communications?" he asked with a smirk. "This is about social media marketing and brand strategy. It requires a college degree and relevant experience." Maria had been managing communications for her unit's public affairs office during her last 2 years of service, coordinating with media outlets and writing press releases, but she didn't bother explaining. The recruiter had already made up his mind about her based on her appearance. By lunchtime, Maria had visited nearly 30 booths and collected exactly 0 business cards or follow-up appointments. She sat in the food court, eating a sandwich she had packed from the motel's complimentary breakfast, watching as other job seekers networked and exchanged contact information. Some were already celebrating job offers they had received that morning. She noticed a group of college students at the next table talking about their interviews. One of them, a blonde girl in a designer blazer, was complaining about having to choose between multiple offers. The starting salary at the consulting firm is only $80,000, she said with a dramatic sigh. But they have better benefits than the marketing agency that offered me $85. Maria did the math in her head. Either of those salaries was more than she had made in her best year in the military, even with combat pay and allowances. She wondered if these kids knew how lucky they were, or if they understood that there were people in the world who would do anything for the opportunities they were casually dismissing. After lunch, she decided to try a different approach. Instead of focusing on the large corporate booths that seemed to attract the most attention, she visited smaller companies and nonprofit organizations that might be more open to hiring veterans. The reception was slightly better, but still discouraging. At a small manufacturing company's booth, the owner seemed genuinely interested in her experience with logistics and inventory management. They talked for almost 15 minutes about supply chain operations and quality control procedures. Maria felt a spark of hope as the conversation progressed. You really seem to understand these concepts, the owner said. It's refreshing to talk to someone with practical experience instead of just theoretical knowledge. But when Maria handed him her resume, she saw his expression change as he noticed the gaps in her employment history and lack of formal education beyond high school. "I'll definitely keep your resume on file," he said, using the polite phrase that job seekers everywhere recognize as a gentle rejection. The afternoon continued much the same way. Maria's feet were beginning to hurt from standing and walking in her combat boots, which weren't designed for walking on concrete floors for hours at a time. The convention center was crowded and stuffy, filled with the competing sounds of dozens of conversations and presentations. She stopped at a booth for a local hospital system that was advertising positions for administrative assistants and patient advocates. The recruiter, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, actually took the time to look at Maria's resume carefully. "You have some really interesting experience here," she said. "Managing personnel records and coordinating medical evacuations shows attention to detail and the ability to work under pressure." Maria felt another flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished when the recruiter explained that all positions required either a college degree or specific medical training certifications. "Have you considered going back to school?" she asked. "There are some good programs for veterans that could help you get the qualifications you need." Going back to school wasn't really an option for Maria. She had used most of her GI Bill benefits to help pay for her younger brother's college tuition when their mother got sick and couldn't work. She had about 6 months of benefits left, but not enough to complete a degree program, and she couldn't afford to live without income while attending school full-time. As the afternoon wore on, Maria found herself questioning whether coming to this job fair had been a mistake. The bus ticket and motel room had cost her nearly $200, money she couldn't really afford to spend. She was living with her aunt in a small apartment, sleeping on the couch and contributing what she could to household expenses with her disability payments and part-time work at a grocery store. The disability payments were for a back injury she had sustained when her convoy hit an improvised explosive device during her final deployment. The injury wasn't severe enough to prevent her from working, but it did cause chronic pain that made it difficult to do physically demanding jobs. The grocery store work was all she had been able to find in her small hometown, and the hours were inconsistent. She had heard about this job fair through a veterans organization newsletter and thought it might be her chance to find something better, something that would use the skills and experience she had gained during her military service. But it was becoming clear that those skills and experiences weren't valued in the civilian job market, at least not by the employers represented here. At around 3 o'clock, Maria overheard a conversation that made her stomach clench with embarrassment and anger. 2 recruiters from different companies were standing near the water fountain, taking a break from their booths. "Did you see the woman in the old army uniform?" one of them asked. Yeah, kind of sad, really, the other replied. You'd think someone would tell her that she needs to dress appropriately for these things. I mean, I respect what she's done for the country, but this isn't a military event. Some of these veterans just don't understand how the business world works, the first recruiter continued. They think military experience translates directly to civilian jobs, but it really doesn't. The skills just aren't transferable. Maria wanted to march over and explain exactly how transferable her skills were. She wanted to tell them about managing multi-million-dollar inventories, about coordinating complex logistics operations across multiple time zones, about making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for the people under her command. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Their minds were already made up. Instead, she walked to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. She had been prepared for rejection, but not for this level of dismissal and condescension. It felt like her military service, the thing she was most proud of in her life, was being treated as a liability rather than an asset. When she emerged from the bathroom, Maria made a decision. She would visit one more section of the job fair, the area dedicated to government contractors and federal agencies. Maybe there she would find employers who understood the value of military experience. The government contractor section was smaller and less crowded than the corporate area. The booths were more modest, and the atmosphere was more subdued. Maria approached the first booth, a defense contractor that provided logistics support to military bases. The recruiter, a former Marine named Dave, greeted her warmly and immediately started asking detailed questions about her military occupational specialty and deployment experience. For the first time all day, Maria felt like someone was actually listening to her qualifications rather than just looking at her appearance. They talked for 20 minutes about supply chain management, inventory control systems, and the challenges of maintaining equipment in harsh environments. Dave seemed genuinely impressed with her experience and knowledge. We're always looking for people who understand military operations from the inside, he said. The problem is, most of our positions require security clearances, and renewing expired clearances can take 6 months to a year. Maria's security clearance had expired 6 months after she left the military. Renewing it would require a job offer from a company that needed cleared personnel, creating a frustrating catch-22 situation. She visited several more booths in the government section with similar results. The recruiters were more respectful and seemed to value her military experience, but they all had requirements that she couldn't meet without additional education, current security clearances, or specialized certifications. By 4 o'clock, Maria was exhausted and discouraged. She had been at the job fair for nearly 6 hours and had nothing to show for it except a folder full of brochures and business cards from companies that weren't really interested in hiring her. The convention center was beginning to empty out as the event wound down for the day. She decided to make one last stop at a booth she had noticed earlier but hadn't visited yet. It was for a large engineering and construction company that worked on infrastructure projects around the world. The booth was impressive, with large displays showing bridges, highways, and buildings the company had constructed. As she approached the booth, Maria noticed that there were several people in military uniforms talking to the recruiters. Some were active-duty service members, identifiable by their crisp uniforms and current rank insignia. Others, like herself, were veterans in older uniforms that had seen better days. The main recruiter at the booth was a woman in her 40s wearing a professional pantsuit and a friendly smile. She was currently talking to a young Air Force officer about project management positions. Maria waited politely for the conversation to finish, studying the company's promotional materials and trying to determine if any of their positions might be a good fit for her background. When the Air Force officer finished his conversation and moved on, Maria stepped forward to introduce herself. But before she could speak, she heard a voice behind her that made her freeze in place. "Well, I'll be damned," the voice said. "If it isn't Santos from the 515th Supply Battalion." Maria turned around slowly, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to place the familiar voice. Standing behind her was a tall man in an immaculate army dress blue uniform, his chest decorated with an impressive array of ribbons and medals. The single star on his shoulder boards identified him as a brigadier general, and there was something about his weathered face and confident bearing that sparked a memory from long ago. "General Morrison?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," he said with a warm smile that transformed his stern military bearing. "Though it was Major Morrison when we first met. I never forget a soldier, especially one who saved my hide in Kandahar." The memory came flooding back to Maria like a dam bursting. It had been during her second deployment, in the spring of 2018. She had been a sergeant then, working as a logistics coordinator for Forward Operating Base Chapman. Major Morrison had been the operations officer for a special task force that was conducting raids against high-value targets in the region. The incident happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Maria had been in the supply warehouse, checking inventory and coordinating the arrival of a supply convoy that was due later that day. The convoy was carrying critical supplies, including ammunition, medical supplies, and repair parts for damaged vehicles. Major Morrison had burst into the warehouse looking harried and desperate. His task force had received actionable intelligence about a Taliban weapons cache that needed to be hit immediately, but they were missing essential equipment for the mission. The original supply request had been lost in the bureaucratic maze of military logistics, and the mission was scheduled to launch in less than 4 hours. "Sergeant Santos," he had said, "I need a miracle. My team needs night vision devices, breaching charges, and secure communication equipment, and I need them in the next 3 hours. The supply chain says it will take 2 weeks to process the request." Most logistics coordinators would have given him the standard response about proper procedures and paperwork requirements. The military runs on precise protocols, and bypassing those protocols, even for urgent operational needs, could result in serious consequences for everyone involved. But Maria had looked at the stress lines around Major Morrison's eyes and made a decision that would define her military career. She knew that lives were on the line, and she also knew that there were ways to make things happen quickly if you were willing to take some risks and call in some favors. "Give me 2 hours, sir," she had said. What followed was a masterclass in creative logistics management that would have impressed any business school professor. Maria started by calling her contacts at other forward operating bases in the region. The night vision devices were available at FOB Shank, about 40 miles away, but they didn't have transportation to get them to Chapman quickly. She remembered that a medical evacuation helicopter was scheduled to fly from Shank to Chapman later that morning to pick up a wounded soldier who needed specialized surgery at the larger base. Maria called the medevac unit and convinced them to make a slight detour to pick up the equipment. The breaching charges were trickier. They were controlled items that required extensive paperwork and authorization from higher headquarters. But Maria knew that another unit at Chapman had been issued breaching charges for a mission that had been canceled the previous week. She tracked down the unit's supply sergeant and convinced him to temporarily loan the charges to Morrison's task force, with the understanding that they would be replaced within 24 hours. The communication equipment was the biggest challenge of all. The secure radios that Morrison's team needed were in short supply throughout the entire region, and the few available units were already allocated to other high-priority missions. Maria spent an hour on the phone, calling supply depots and logistics centers across Afghanistan. She finally found what she needed at Bagram Air Base, nearly 200 miles away. The equipment was available, but there was no way to get it to Chapman in time for the mission. That's when Maria had her most creative idea. She knew that a cargo plane was scheduled to fly from Bagram to Kabul International Airport later that day, and another plane was flying from Kabul to Chapman that evening. If she could get the communication equipment on the first plane and coordinate a transfer at Kabul, she could have it at Chapman by nightfall. The plan required her to call in favors with cargo handlers at 3 different bases, coordinate with air traffic controllers to ensure the transfers happened on time, and convince a mail clerk at Kabul to personally hand-carry the equipment from one plane to another during a tight connection window. Somehow it all worked. The night vision devices arrived on the medevac helicopter with an hour to spare. The breaching charges were delivered to Morrison's team along with proper documentation, ensuring they would be replaced quickly. The communication equipment landed at Chapman just as Morrison's team was conducting their final mission briefing. Major Morrison had been amazed and grateful. The mission had been a complete success, resulting in the capture of several high-value targets and the seizure of a significant weapons cache. More importantly, No American soldiers had been killed or wounded during the operation. Sergeant Santos, Major Morrison had said after the mission, "What you did today saved American lives. You turned an impossible situation into a success story. I won't forget this." But that wasn't the end of Maria's involvement in the story. 3 days later, she received an urgent call from Major Morrison. The Taliban had learned about the successful raid and were planning a retaliatory attack against the forward operating base. Intelligence indicated that they were going to target the supply warehouse where Maria worked, hoping to disrupt the base's operations and inflict maximum casualties. Maria could have simply passed the intelligence up the chain of command and waited for orders. But she knew that the warehouse was vulnerable and that several of her soldiers would be working there when the attack came. Instead, she took initiative to coordinate the base's defensive preparations. Working with the base security team, Maria helped to evacuate non-essential personnel from the warehouse area and established alternative supply distribution points that would be harder to target. She coordinated with the motor pool to move critical vehicles to protected positions and worked with the communications team to establish backup command and control capabilities. When the attack came, it was more intense than anyone had expected. The Taliban launched a coordinated assault using rockets, mortars, and small arms fire. The warehouse area was hit hard, but because of Maria's preparations, casualties were minimal and the base's operations continued without significant disruption. During the firefight, Maria had distinguished herself again. When a rocket-propelled grenade damaged the main communication antenna, cutting off contact with higher headquarters, she personally climbed onto the roof of the warehouse under fire to install a backup antenna that she had positioned there as part of her contingency planning. Major Morrison had witnessed her actions during the attack and immediately recommended her for a Bronze Star Medal for her heroic actions under fire and her exceptional performance in logistics management. The recommendation had worked its way through the military bureaucracy, and Maria had received the medal in a ceremony 3 months later. But medals and commendations were just pieces of metal and paper. What mattered more to Maria was the knowledge that her actions had made a real difference. Major Morrison had made sure she knew that the mission she had supported had led to actionable intelligence that prevented several other planned attacks against coalition forces. Now, 8 years later, Major Morrison had become Brigadier General Morrison, and Maria was standing in a job fair wearing that same faded uniform, looking for work and being dismissed by people who had no idea what she had accomplished. "General, what are you doing here?" Maria asked, still somewhat stunned by the unexpected encounter. "I'm on the board of directors for Titan Construction and Engineering," he explained, gesturing toward the booth behind Maria. "We're one of the largest infrastructure contractors in the country, and we do a lot of work with the military. I make it a point to attend veteran job fairs whenever I'm in the area." He paused and looked at her more carefully, taking in her worn uniform and the tired lines around her eyes. "The real question is, what are you doing here looking for work? Last I heard, you were being fast-tracked for promotion to Sergeant First Class." Maria felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I got out after my 3rd deployment, sir. Family reasons. My mother was sick, and I needed to come home to help take care of her." It was a simplified version of the truth. The full story was much more complicated and painful. Maria's mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease, just as Maria was being considered for promotion to the senior non-commissioned officer ranks. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 15, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. When her mother's condition began to deteriorate rapidly, Maria faced an impossible choice. She could stay in the army and pursue the career she loved, knowing that her mother would have to go into a nursing home that the family couldn't afford. Or she could leave the military and move back home to become her mother's primary caregiver. For Maria, there had really been no choice at all. Family came first, even if it meant giving up everything she had worked for in her military career. She had used her terminal leave and savings to move back home and take care of her mother for the last 2 years of her life. The experience had been emotionally and financially devastating. Watching her vibrant, intelligent mother slowly lose her memories and abilities had been heartbreaking. The medical bills had consumed most of Maria's savings, even with her military health insurance. By the time her mother passed away the previous year, Maria was essentially starting over at age 28 with no civilian job experience and no money. General Morrison seemed to sense that there was more to the story than she was sharing. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "Taking care of family is one of the most honorable things a person can do. But tell me, what kind of work are you looking for now?" "Anything that will let me use some of the skills I learned in the Army," Maria replied. "Logistics management, supply chain operations, project coordination. I've been having a hard time convincing civilian employers that military experience translates to their world." General Morrison's expression darkened. "What do you mean you're having a hard time? Who's been telling you that?" Maria gestured toward the rest of the job fair. "Pretty much everyone here. I've been to about 40 booths today, and most recruiters won't even look at my resume once they see me. Some have been pretty blunt about it." "That's unacceptable," General Morrison said, his voice taking on the command tone that had once directed military operations across multiple countries. "These people have no idea what you're capable of. Do they know about Kandahar? Do they know about the lives you saved and the operations you enabled?" "It's not on my resume," Maria admitted. "Most of that stuff was classified, and I wasn't sure how to explain it to civilian employers anyway." General Morrison shook his head in frustration. "That's exactly the problem. Veterans like you have incredible experience and capabilities, but you don't know how to translate them into language that civilian employers understand. And these employers," he gestured dismissively toward the crowded job fair, "are too ignorant and short-sighted to recognize talent when it's standing right in front of them." He paused for a moment, clearly thinking through something. "Maria, do you have a few minutes? I'd like you to meet some people." Before she could respond, General Morrison was walking toward the Titan construction booth, his confident stride parting the crowd of job seekers like a ship cutting through water. Maria hurried to keep up, suddenly, conscious again of how her faded uniform looked compared to his pristine dress blues. At the booth, General Morrison approached the woman Maria had noticed earlier, the one in the professional pantsuit who had been talking to the Air Force officer. "Linda," he said, "I'd like you to meet Sergeant Maria Santos, one of the finest logisticians I had the pleasure of serving with in Afghanistan." Linda looked up with a polite smile that became more genuine when she saw General Morrison. "Always good to see you, General. How can I help?" "Maria here is looking for opportunities in logistics and supply chain management," General Morrison explained. "And I'm telling you right now, if you don't hire her, you're making a huge mistake." Linda's eyebrows raised slightly at the General's emphatic endorsement. "That's quite a recommendation. Tell me about your experience, Maria." For the first time all day, Maria felt like someone was actually interested in hearing what she had to say. But she was also acutely aware that General Morrison was watching, and she didn't want to disappoint him by underselling her accomplishments. "I spent 4 years in Army logistics," she began carefully. "I managed supply operations for forward operating bases, coordinated multi-million-dollar inventories, and supervised teams responsible for maintaining critical supply lines in combat environments." "She's being modest," General Morrison interjected. "Maria once coordinated a complex logistics operation that enabled a critical mission with less than 4 hours' notice. She managed resources across multiple bases, coordinated air transport, and improvised solutions that would have impressed any Fortune 500 supply chain manager." Linda looked interested but still somewhat skeptical. "That does sound impressive, but our projects are quite different from military operations. We build roads, bridges, and buildings. The logistics involved are complex, but they're civilian infrastructure projects." "With respect," General Morrison said, "Maria has managed logistics operations in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. She's coordinated supply chains under enemy fire, managed inventory in extreme weather conditions, and supervised personnel under life and death pressure. If she can do that, she can certainly manage the logistics for a construction project in Phoenix or Denver." Maria could see Linda's perspective shifting as General Morrison spoke. For the first time, someone was translating her military experience into terms that a civilian employer could understand and appreciate. "What kind of positions are you looking to fill?" Maria asked, trying to keep the conversation moving in a positive direction. "We have several openings for project coordinators and logistics specialists," Linda replied. "The work involves coordinating with multiple contractors, managing material deliveries, and ensuring that projects stay on schedule and within budget. It requires strong organizational skills, attention to detail, and the ability to work under pressure. That sounds exactly like what I did in the Army, Maria said, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time all day. Except instead of building bridges over rivers, I was maintaining supply lines across hostile territory. General Morrison smiled at her response. Linda, I want to tell you about something that happened in Kandahar that will help you understand exactly what kind of person you're talking to. Over the next 10 minutes, General Morrison recounted the story of the mission that Maria had supported, explaining in detail how her quick thinking and creative problem-solving had enabled a successful operation. He described her actions during the subsequent attack on the base, emphasizing how her leadership and initiative had prevented casualties and maintained operational continuity. As he spoke, Maria watched Linda's expression change from polite interest to genuine amazement. Other people at the booth, including several Titan employees and job seekers, had stopped their conversations to listen to General Morrison's story. She climbed onto a roof under enemy fire to install a communication antenna? Linda asked when General Morrison finished. While rocket-propelled grenades were exploding around her, he confirmed. And she did it because she knew that maintaining communication was critical to the safety of everyone on the base. That's the kind of person you want managing your logistics operations. Linda turned back to Maria with a new level of respect in her eyes. I have to say, that's not the kind of experience we usually see from job candidates. Most of our project coordinators come from construction or business backgrounds. And how well are they performing? General Morrison asked pointedly. Linda laughed. Well, we have had some challenges with project delays and cost overruns. And finding people who can handle the pressure of large, complex projects has been difficult. Maria thrives under pressure, General Morrison said. She's used to managing multiple priorities simultaneously, coordinating with diverse teams, and adapting to changing circumstances on the fly. Those are exactly the skills you need in this business. Maria could see that Linda was genuinely considering what General Morrison was saying, but she also sensed some hesitation. Is there something specific you're concerned about? She asked. Linda hesitated for a moment before responding. To be honest, we've had mixed results with veteran hires in the past. Some have been excellent, but others have struggled with the transition to civilian workplace culture. The military is very structured and hierarchical, while our projects require more collaborative, flexible approaches. General Morrison bristled at the implication, but Maria held up a hand to stop him from responding. She had heard variations of this concern at several booths throughout the day, and she knew it was important to address it directly. I understand that concern, she said calmly. But I think there's a misconception about how the military actually operates, especially in combat environments. Yes, there's a clear chain of command, but successful operations require incredible amounts of collaboration and flexibility. She paused to gather her thoughts before continuing. When I was coordinating that mission General Morrison described, I had to work with people from different units, different services, and different countries. I had to negotiate with helicopter pilots, cargo handlers, supply sergeants, and air traffic controllers, none of whom worked for me or were required to help me. The military taught me how to build relationships quickly, how to find creative solutions to impossible problems, and how to get things done even when the official processes don't work, Maria continued. Those skills seem pretty valuable in any workplace. Linda nodded thoughtfully. You make a good point. And General Morrison's endorsement certainly carries a lot of weight. Would you be interested in coming in for a formal interview? Maria felt her heart skip a beat. After a day full of rejections and dismissive comments, someone was actually offering her an opportunity. Absolutely. When would be convenient? How about next week? Linda suggested. I'd like you to meet with our regional operations manager and maybe sit in on a project planning meeting so you can see what we do. That sounds perfect, Maria replied, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. Linda handed her a business card and wrote a note on the back. Give me a call Monday morning, and we'll set something up. In the meantime, I'd like you to think about how your military experience relates to civilian project management. Be prepared to give specific examples of challenges you've overcome and results you've achieved. After Linda moved on to talk to other job seekers, General Morrison turned to Maria with a satisfied smile. See what happens when someone takes the time to understand what you bring to the table. Maria could barely contain her excitement as she and General Morrison stepped away from the Titan construction booth. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a real shot at landing a meaningful job that would use her skills and experience. "General, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was ready to give up when you showed up." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a knowing smile. "Linda giving you an interview is just the first step. You still have to prove that you're the right person for the job." General Morrison glanced at his watch and then looked back at Maria. "Do you have plans for dinner tonight? There are some things I'd like to discuss with you, and I think there are a few more people you should meet while you're here." Maria thought about the bus ticket back home that she had already purchased for early the next morning. She had budgeted carefully for this trip, and extending her stay would mean additional hotel costs she couldn't really afford. But this opportunity felt too important to let slip away. "I can stay another night if you think it would be helpful," she said. "I think it would be very helpful," General Morrison replied. "Let me make a few phone calls and see who else is in town. In the meantime, why don't you spend some time walking through the rest of the job fair with new confidence? You might be surprised how differently people respond to you now that you know your worth." As General Morrison walked away to make his calls, Maria found herself standing alone in the middle of the busy job fair with a completely different perspective than she had started the day with. The same booths were there, the same recruiters, the same job seekers in their expensive suits. But something fundamental had changed in how she saw herself and her value. She decided to revisit some of the booths where she had been dismissed earlier in the day, not necessarily to apply for jobs, but to practice articulating her experience in civilian terms. The first booth she approached was the financial services company where the female recruiter had suggested she try the government contractor section. This time, instead of simply mentioning that she had 4 years of experience, Maria was more specific about what that experience entailed. "I spent 4 years managing complex logistics operations with budgets in the millions of dollars," she told the recruiter. "I supervised teams of up to 30 people and coordinated operations across multiple time zones and geographic locations. I also have extensive experience in risk management and contingency planning." The recruiter's response was markedly different than it had been that morning. She asked follow-up questions about budget management and team leadership, and even requested a copy of Maria's resume for future reference. At the technology company booth, Maria framed her experience in terms that resonated with their needs. "In the military, I was responsible for implementing and managing complex inventory tracking systems," she explained. "I had to ensure data accuracy across multiple databases and coordinate with various stakeholders to maintain supply chain integrity." The recruiter, who had barely acknowledged her that morning, now seemed genuinely interested. He explained that they were looking for project managers who could work with their software development teams and their clients to implement new systems. "We need people who can translate between technical teams and business users," he said. "Someone who understands both the technical requirements and the practical implications of system implementations." "That sounds a lot like what I did in coordinating between different military units and civilian contractors," Maria replied. "I had to make sure that technical solutions actually worked for the people who had to use them in real-world conditions." The conversation continued for 15 minutes, with the recruiter asking detailed questions about her experience with project management, team coordination, and problem-solving under pressure. When it ended, he handed her his business card and asked her to apply through their online portal. "Make sure you mention our conversation in your cover letter," he said. "I'll watch for your application." As Maria continued through the job fair, she realized that General Morrison had done more than just advocate for her at the Titan construction booth. He had fundamentally changed how she thought about her own experience and how she presented herself to potential employers. Instead of apologizing for her military background or trying to minimize it, she now understood that it was actually a significant advantage. The skills she had developed and the experiences she had gained were rare and valuable in the civilian job market. The problem wasn't with her qualifications, it was with her ability to communicate those qualifications effectively. At a logistics company booth, she met with a hiring manager who was immediately interested in her supply chain experience. They discussed inventory management, vendor relations, and quality control procedures. The hiring manager explained that they worked with retailers to optimize their distribution networks and reduce costs. We're always looking for people who understand the operational side of logistics, he said. Too many of our candidates have theoretical knowledge, but no practical experience managing actual supply chains under pressure. I've managed supply chains where a mistake could literally mean life or death, Maria replied. Retail logistics might be less dramatic, but the fundamental principles are the same. The hiring manager laughed. You're right about that. And honestly, if you can manage supply lines in a combat zone, you can probably handle anything our retail clients can throw at you. He invited her to apply for a senior analyst position that would involve working with major retail chains to optimize their logistics operations. The position offered a salary that was nearly double what she was currently making at the grocery store, along with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. By the time General Morrison found her again later that afternoon, Maria had collected business cards from 8 different companies and had been invited to submit applications for 12 different positions. The transformation in her confidence was visible to anyone who looked closely. You look like a different person than the woman I met a few hours ago, General Morrison observed. I feel like a different person, Maria replied. I can't believe I was letting people convince me that my experience wasn't valuable. That's unfortunately common among veterans, General Morrison said. We train people to be modest about their achievements and to focus on the team rather than individual accomplishments. Those are good traits in the military, but they can be counterproductive in the civilian job market. He paused and looked around the busy convention center. I've made some calls, and there are a few people I'd like you to meet tonight. But first, let me ask you something. Are you serious about building a career in the private sector, or are you just looking for any job to pay the bills? It was a fair question, and one that Maria had been thinking about a lot over the past few months. I want to build a career, she said without hesitation. I loved what I did in the Army, and I want to find a way to use those skills in civilian life. I'm not just looking for a paycheck. Good, General Morrison said. Because the people I want you to meet tonight are serious business leaders who can open doors for you, but only if you're willing to work for it. That evening, Maria found herself in the private dining room of an upscale restaurant, surrounded by some of the most successful business executives she had ever met. General Morrison had arranged a dinner gathering that included the CEO of a major construction company, the vice president of operations for a large manufacturing firm, the regional director for a logistics corporation, and the founder of a consulting company that specialized in organizational efficiency. At first, Maria felt intimidated by the group. These were people who managed companies with thousands of employees and budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She was a former sergeant from a small town who had been working part-time at a grocery store just that morning. But as the conversation progressed, she began to realize that these executives were genuinely interested in hearing about her military experience. They asked detailed questions about leadership, decision-making under pressure, and managing complex operations with limited resources. The CEO of the construction company, a man named Robert Chun, was particularly interested in her story about coordinating the mission support in Afghanistan. What you described is essentially crisis management and resource optimization under extreme constraints, he said. Those are skills that every business leader needs, but very few actually possess. In the private sector, we talk a lot about lean operations and just-in-time delivery, added the manufacturing VP, Susan Rodriguez. But most of our managers have never actually had to make those concepts work in life or death situations. The consulting company founder, Dr. Patricia Williams, leaned forward with obvious interest. Maria, have you ever considered that your military experience might qualify you for senior-level positions rather than entry-level ones? Maria was taken aback by the suggestion. I don't have a college degree, she said. Most senior positions require a bachelor's degree at minimum, don't they? Many do, Dr. Williams admitted. But experience can often substitute for formal education, especially when that experience is as unique and relevant as yours. General Morrison, who had been listening quietly throughout most of the dinner, finally spoke up. This is exactly the problem I was telling you about, he said to the group. We have incredibly talented veterans like Maria who are undervaluing themselves because they don't understand how rare their skills really are. Robert Chin nodded in agreement. The corporate world is full of people with MBAs who have never managed anything more challenging than a budget spreadsheet. Maria has managed million-dollar operations under enemy fire. There's no comparison. Dr. Williams pulled out her business card and handed it to Maria. I'd like to talk to you about some opportunities we might have. We work with companies to improve their operational efficiency and crisis management capabilities. Your background could be extremely valuable to our clients. Susan Rodriguez also expressed interest in having Maria visit her manufacturing facilities. We're always looking for people who understand lean operations and quality control. Your experience with maintaining supply lines in challenging environments could translate very well to our industry. As the dinner continued, Maria found herself engaged in conversations about business strategy, operational efficiency, and leadership development. These executives weren't talking down to her or treating her like a charity case. They were treating her as a peer, someone whose insights and experience had value. The evening concluded with Maria having tentative offers for 3 different positions, in addition to the interview opportunity at Titan Construction. More importantly, she now had a network of senior business leaders who understood her value and were willing to advocate for her. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, General Morrison pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. I want you to understand something, he said. What happened today wasn't luck or charity. You earned these opportunities through your service and your capabilities. But this is just the beginning. He paused and looked at her seriously. The business world can be just as challenging as the military in its own way. There will be setbacks and disappointments. Some people will still underestimate you because of your background or your lack of formal education. But you have something that most people in the business world lack, he continued. You have the ability to perform under pressure, to solve complex problems with limited resources, and to lead people through difficult situations. Those skills are incredibly valuable if you know how to use them. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as the full impact of the day's events hit her. 12 hours earlier, she had been ready to give up on her dreams of finding meaningful work that would use her military experience. Now she had multiple opportunities and a network of supporters who believed in her potential. General, I still don't know how to thank you, she said. Thank me by succeeding, he replied. And someday, when you're in a position to help another veteran who's struggling to transition to civilian life, remember this day and pay it forward. As they walked out of the restaurant, Maria thought about the bus ticket home that she would need to change. She had interviews to prepare for and opportunities to pursue. The faded uniform that had been a source of embarrassment that morning now felt like a badge of honor. She thought about all the veterans who were probably struggling with the same challenges she had faced, people with incredible skills and experience who were being overlooked because they didn't know how to communicate their value to civilian employers. Maybe someday she would be in a position to help them, just as General Morrison had helped her. Maybe she would become one of those successful business leaders who understood the value of military experience and who could advocate for veterans in the corporate world. But for now, she had work to do. She had interviews to prepare for, applications to submit, and a new career to build. The transition from military to civilian life was never easy, but for the first time in months, Maria felt like she had a clear path forward and the support she needed to succeed. As she walked back to her hotel, Maria noticed that she was walking differently than she had that morning. Her posture was straighter, her stride was more confident, and she felt like she belonged in the business world in a way she never had before. The faded uniform was still the same, but everything else had changed. She was no longer a struggling veteran looking for any job that would pay the bills. She was a skilled professional with valuable experience and a bright future ahead of her. Tomorrow she would start the process of building that future, one interview and one opportunity at a time. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Maria Santos felt truly optimistic about what lay ahead. 6 months after that transformative day at the Phoenix Job Fair, Maria Santos stood in the conference room of Titan Construction's regional headquarters, leading a presentation to a group of senior executives about the successful completion of the company's largest infrastructure project of the year. The same faded uniform that had once been a source of embarrassment now hung framed in her office as a reminder of how far she had come. The interview process with Titan Construction had been intense, but rewarding. Linda Chun had introduced Maria to the regional operations manager, David Kovac, who had been initially skeptical about hiring someone without construction industry experience. However, General Morrison's endorsement and Maria's impressive interview performance had convinced him to take a chance. During the interview, Maria had drawn parallels between managing supply lines in Afghanistan and coordinating material deliveries for construction projects. She explained how both required precise timing, contingency planning, and the ability to adapt quickly when circumstances changed. In Afghanistan, if a supply convoy was delayed or attacked, I had to immediately implement backup plans to ensure critical materials reached their destination, she had told David. The stakes were life and death, but the problem-solving process is the same whether you're delivering ammunition to soldiers or concrete to a construction site. David had been impressed by her analytical approach and her ability to break down complex problems into manageable components. He offered her a position as a junior project coordinator, with the understanding that she would need to learn the technical aspects of construction management, but could immediately contribute her logistics and leadership skills. Maria's first project had been the construction of a new highway interchange outside Phoenix, a complex undertaking involving multiple contractors, strict environmental regulations, and a compressed timeline due to federal funding requirements. The project was already behind schedule when she was assigned to it, and the previous project coordinator had quit in frustration after several major setbacks. Maria approached the challenge with the same methodical planning and creative problem-solving that had served her well in the military. She spent her first week on the project conducting a thorough assessment of all the moving parts, identifying potential bottlenecks, and developing contingency plans for likely scenarios. She discovered that much of the project's delay was due to poor communication between different contractors and a lack of coordination in material deliveries. Concrete trucks were arriving before the site was ready, steel beams were being delivered to the wrong locations, and environmental inspectors were showing up when work crews weren't prepared for their visits. Maria implemented a comprehensive coordination system that she based on military logistics principles. She established daily briefings with all contractor representatives, created detailed schedules that accounted for dependencies between different work streams, and set up communication protocols that ensured everyone had real-time information about project status. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within 3 weeks, the project was back on schedule. Within 2 months, it was actually ahead of schedule despite the earlier delays. More importantly, the coordination system Maria had implemented became a model that Titan Construction began using on other projects. David Kovac had been amazed by the turnaround. "I've never seen anything like it," he told Linda Chun during Maria's 3-month performance review. She completely changed the culture of that project site. Contractors who had been fighting with each other were suddenly working together like a well-oiled machine. The success of the highway project had led to increasingly challenging assignments. Maria was promoted to senior project coordinator after just 4 months and was given responsibility for managing multiple projects simultaneously. She was currently overseeing the construction of a new hospital, the renovation of a university campus, and the development of a mixed-use commercial complex. Each project presented unique challenges that required the skills Maria had developed in the military. The hospital construction was operating under tight deadlines because the existing facility was overcrowded and desperately needed additional capacity. Maria had to coordinate with dozens of specialized contractors while ensuring that work didn't interfere with ongoing medical operations in adjacent buildings. The university renovation was politically sensitive, involving multiple stakeholder groups with competing interests and a limited budget that required creative cost-saving measures. Maria had to navigate complex relationships between university administrators, faculty representatives, student organizations, and local government officials. The commercial complex was technically challenging, requiring innovative engineering solutions to build on a difficult site with poor soil conditions and limited access for construction vehicles. Maria worked closely with the engineering team to develop construction sequences that minimized risk while maximizing efficiency. Today's presentation was to update Titan Construction's executive team on the status of all 3 projects and to request approval for a new project management methodology that Maria had developed based on her military experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maria began, addressing the room full of senior executives. 6 months ago, this company was struggling with cost overruns and schedule delays on major projects. Today, I'm pleased to report that all 3 of our flagship projects are on or ahead of schedule and within budget. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a comparison of project performance metrics before and after she had implemented her coordination system. The improvement was striking. Average project delays had decreased from 38 days to fewer than 5 days. Cost overruns had been reduced by 60%, and client satisfaction scores had increased dramatically. The key to this improvement has been implementing what I call mission-critical coordination, Maria continued. This approach treats every project like a military operation, with clear command structures, detailed contingency planning, and constant communication between all team members. Robert Chun, the CEO who had been at the dinner General Morrison arranged 6 months earlier, raised his hand. Maria, can you give us a specific example of how this military approach solved a real problem? Absolutely, Maria replied. Last month, we had a crisis on the hospital project. A key structural component was delayed due to a manufacturing defect, and we were facing a 3-week delay that would have pushed the project past its critical deadline. She clicked to a slide showing the project timeline and the potential impact of the delay. Using traditional approaches, we would have simply accepted the delay and dealt with the consequences. But I applied military-style contingency planning. I immediately assembled a crisis team with representatives from all affected contractors and spent 2 hours brainstorming alternative solutions. We identified a different manufacturer who could produce a similar component, but it required design modifications and expedited shipping. Rather than waiting for the design changes to be approved through normal channels, I coordinated with our engineering team to fast-track the approval process while simultaneously arranging for expedited manufacturing and shipping. I also reorganized the construction sequence to work around the delayed component while we waited for the replacement. The result was that instead of a 3-week delay, we had only a 2-day delay, and the project actually ended up ahead of schedule because the alternative component was actually more efficient to install. The executives in the room nodded appreciatively. This was the kind of problem-solving they wanted to see from their project managers, but it was rare to find people who could think and act so decisively under pressure. Susan Rodriguez, the manufacturing VP who had also been at the dinner, leaned forward with interest. Maria, you mentioned developing a new project management methodology. What exactly are you proposing? Maria had been hoping someone would ask this question. She had spent weeks developing a comprehensive framework that adapted military planning and coordination principles to civilian construction projects. I'm proposing that we formalize the approaches I've been using into a standardized methodology that can be taught to all our project managers, she said. I call it the Integrated Mission Command System. She clicked to a detailed flowchart showing how the system would work. The core concept is treating each project like a military mission with clearly defined objectives, detailed operational plans, and built-in flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. The system has 3 main components, she continued. First, comprehensive pre-project planning that includes detailed risk assessment and contingency planning. Second, real-time coordination protocols that ensure constant communication between all team members. Third, adaptive leadership principles that empower project managers to make quick decisions when circumstances change. Maria spent the next 20 minutes walking through each component of the system, providing specific examples from her recent projects and showing how the methodology could be adapted to different types of construction projects. When she finished, there was silence in the room for several moments. Finally, Robert Chin spoke up. Maria, this is impressive work. How long would it take you to develop a training program to teach this methodology to our other project managers? I've actually already started working on that, Maria replied. I estimate it would take about 3 months to develop a comprehensive training program, including case studies, simulation exercises, and assessment tools. David Kovac, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the presentation, looked up with obvious excitement. Robert, if we can replicate Maria's results across all our projects, it would transform our competitive position. We could bid more aggressively on projects because we'd have confidence in our ability to deliver on time and within budget. Linda Chun nodded in agreement. The client satisfaction improvements alone would be worth the investment. Happy clients mean repeat business and positive references. Robertson looked around the room at his executive team, gauging their reactions. I think we need to move forward with this. Maria, I want you to lead the development of this training program. You'll have whatever resources you need and a team of instructional designers to help you. He paused and looked at her directly. I also think it's time we talked about your long-term career path here at Titan. Are you interested in moving into management? Maria felt her heart skip a beat. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to find any job that would recognize her value. Now she was being offered the opportunity to lead a major initiative for one of the largest construction companies in the region. Yes, sir, I'm very interested, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Good, Robert said. I want you to work with Linda to develop a career development plan. We're going to need strong leaders as we continue to grow, and I think you have the potential to be one of them. After the meeting ended and the executives filed out, Maria remained in the conference room for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In less than an hour, she had gone from being a project coordinator to being tasked with developing company-wide training programs and being considered for management positions. Her phone buzzed with a text message from General Morrison. Heard through the grapevine that you're presenting to the executive team today. Break a leg. I know you'll do great. Maria smiled and typed back. Just finished. It went better than I could have hoped. Thank you again for everything. His reply came quickly. You did this yourself. I just helped you see what was already there. Proud of you. As Maria gathered her materials and prepared to leave the conference room, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The transition from military to civilian life had been more challenging than she had expected, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of finding people who believed in her potential. She thought about the other veterans who were probably struggling with similar challenges right now. Veterans who had incredible skills and experience, but didn't know how to communicate their value to civilian employers. Veterans who were letting people convince them that their military service wasn't relevant to the business world. Maria had already begun volunteering with a local veterans organization, helping transitioning service members with resume writing and interview preparation. She was planning to expand that effort, possibly developing workshops specifically focused on helping veterans translate their military experience into civilian career opportunities. But she also realized that the best way she could help other veterans was by succeeding in her own career, by demonstrating that military experience was not just relevant, but invaluable in the business world, by rising to leadership positions where she could influence hiring decisions and advocate for veteran employment. As she walked back to her office, Maria passed the framed uniform hanging on her wall. The same faded desert camouflage that had once been a source of embarrassment was now a symbol of pride and accomplishment. It reminded her of the lessons she had learned, the challenges she had overcome, and the person she had become. The uniform also reminded her of the soldiers she had served with, many of whom were probably facing their own transition challenges. Some had been wounded in combat and were dealing with physical or psychological injuries in addition to the normal difficulties of finding civilian employment. Others had families to support and couldn't afford to take risks on uncertain career opportunities. Maria was fortunate to have encountered General Morrison at exactly the right moment, but she knew that many veterans weren't that lucky. They needed advocates in the business community who understood their value and were willing to take chances on them. She made a mental note to talk to Robert Chun about developing a formal veteran hiring program at Titan Construction. The company was growing rapidly and needed talented people at all levels. Veterans could fill many of those roles if they were given proper opportunities and support. Later that afternoon, Maria received a call from Dr. Patricia Williams, the consulting company founder she had met at the dinner 6 months earlier. Dr. Williams had a proposal that would take Maria's career in an entirely different direction. Maria, I've been following your progress at Titan, and I'm impressed with what you've accomplished, Dr. Williams said. I have an opportunity that might interest you. She explained that her consulting firm was expanding their government contracting division and needed someone with both military experience and proven business skills to lead the effort. The position would involve working with federal agencies to improve their operational efficiency and would require frequent travel to military installations around the country. You'd essentially be translating between the military and civilian business worlds, Dr. Williams explained, helping military leaders understand modern business practices while helping civilian contractors understand military culture and requirements. The opportunity was intriguing, but Maria was committed to her current role at Titan and excited about the training program she was developing. I appreciate the offer, Dr. Williams, but I think I need to stay focused on what I'm building here. I understand, Dr. Williams replied, but I want you to keep this opportunity in mind for the future. What you're doing at Titan is valuable, but I think your long-term potential extends far beyond construction management. After the call ended, Maria reflected on how much her perspective had changed over the past 6 months. 6 months ago, she would have jumped at any opportunity that offered decent pay and benefits. Now she was in the position of choosing between multiple career paths and thinking strategically about her long-term goals. The evening concluded with a celebration dinner that Linda Chun had organized for the project team. As Maria sat around the table with her colleagues, listening to them discuss upcoming projects and sharing stories about construction challenges, she felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. These people respected her expertise, valued her contributions, and saw her as an integral part of the team. More importantly, they expected great things from her and were giving her the support and opportunities she needed to achieve them. As the dinner wound down, Maria excused herself and stepped outside to make a phone call. She dialed a number she hadn't called in several months. "Hey, Carlos, it's Maria," she said when her younger brother answered. "How's school going?" Carlos was a senior at the state university, studying engineering with the help of the GI Bill benefits that Maria had transferred to him when their mother got sick. He was planning to graduate in the spring and was already being recruited by several major companies. "Maria, great to hear from you. School's good. I'm actually thinking about coming to Phoenix for spring break to visit you. I keep hearing about this new job of yours." "You should definitely come," Maria replied. "I'd love to show you around and introduce you to some people. Who knows, maybe Titan will have an opening for a new engineering graduate." They talked for a few more minutes about Carlos's studies and job prospects. As the conversation ended, Maria realized how much her success was benefiting not just herself, but her entire family. Carlos would graduate debt-free and with better opportunities because of the sacrifices she had made and the career she was building. Walking back into the restaurant, Maria felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. The struggles, the setbacks, and even the humiliation she had experienced at the job fair had all contributed to making her stronger and more determined. The faded uniform had been a symbol of everything that seemed to be working against her that day in Phoenix. But it had also been a symbol of her service, her sacrifice, and her capabilities. General Morrison had recognized that, and had helped her learn to see it as well. Now, as she looked toward the future, Maria saw unlimited possibilities. She could continue building her career at Titan Construction, potentially rising to senior leadership positions within the company. She could pursue opportunities in consulting or government contracting. She could even consider starting her own business someday, using the skills and experience she had gained in both the military and civilian sectors. But whatever path she chose, Maria knew she would never forget the lessons of that day at the job fair. The importance of self-advocacy, the value of military experience in the civilian world, and the power of having advocates who believe in your potential. Most importantly, she would never forget her commitment to help other veterans navigate the transition to civilian careers. Too many talented people were being overlooked because they didn't know how to communicate their value or because civilian employers didn't understand what they had to offer. Maria Santos had learned to see her faded uniform not as a source of embarrassment, but as a badge of honor that represented skills, experience, and character that could not be taught in any business school. And she was determined to help other veterans learn to see their service the same way.